Good evening. Good evening.
Thank you.
I want to welcome you to the Police Oversight Board meeting today, June 14th. First of all, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, to the people, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The board's mission statement is advancing constitutional policing and accountability for APD and the Albuquerque community. Can I get an approval of tonight's agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any changes that we need to make?
Not that
I
I'm
have a
aware
change
of.
for the agenda, Chair.
Okay, please.
I would like to remove Section 8B-1 from the agenda in its entirety.
That's making semi-annual reports, is that correct?
Yeah, further amending the ordinance, which has 4 subsections.
We're going to eliminate that altogether?
I so move.
Okay. Any discussion on that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were eliminating.
Further amending of the ordinances, we have,
Item 3,
yes,
B1, 3.
B1,
All of those
all of
items.
B,
Oh, all 3 of them?
Yes.
Oh, 4 of
Okay.
them. Okay.
any objections?
I just want to know why. Are we not ready?
Well, as to item 2, changing the rules about succeeding oneself, I did a double check. I discovered that that was found only within the procedures and policies and not within the ordinance, so that was a moot point.
Okay.
Making semi-annual reports into annual reports, in my double check, discovered that that was mandated by the CASA, so it would not be so simple as to amend the ordinance. And so I think it would be best time-wise to completely eliminate these items from the agenda as opposed to,
I got you.
Okay,
Thank you.
yes.
thank you. All right, so noted.
So then I guess with that, we should change the motion to accept the agenda with the changes as proposed by Chelsea.
Please, you can make that motion. Is that a motion?
I am making that motion, sir.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay. It's a motion and second that we make the necessary changes to item 8 for the amending of the ordinances. All righty, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Opposed have the same rights. Approval, public comments. First, let me just state that public comments will be held to 3 minutes. You will be timed. First on our list is Tony Perard, followed by Alan Wegman, and I really can't read that.
Can't read that either.
Okay. So Tony Perard and Alan Wegman will begin. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. My name's Tony Perard, and for a while now I've been involved with this settlement agreement and the Oversight Board here for quite a few years now. It seems that there's a Bob Martinez, who's the head of the police, Fraternal Order of Police, who seems to think that citizens should never be on any kind of oversight board. For that, I think he should resign his position. It seems that the settlement agreement is not going as planned. Changing a few words on these SOPs and use of force policies does not constitute a viable change or a noticeable change. A lot of these meetings are veering away from the fact that police reforms are necessary we cannot sweep these police murders under the rug. Churches have a notion that the sixth commandment is to be disregarded. And they have to remember that sixth commandment is thou shalt not kill. So all are nil and void as far as the settlement agreement goes. And it is targeted at basically sweeping police murders under the rug. And so that's about all I have to say. I didn't have a proper speech ready, but thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Alan Wegman?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'd like to speak to the use of force rules, and I know that there's a separate time set for that, but I have someplace else to be. With respect to section 2-52-4A2, it reads, an officer shall use only the degree of force that is reasonable, necessary under the circumstances, and proportional to the threat or resistance of the individual. I suggest that that be changed to, an officer shall only use the degree of force that, under the totality of the circumstances, is reasonable, necessary, and proportional as those terms are defined in subsections B, C, D, and E of this section. Just to make what the terms mean clearer, as an attorney defending an officer, I could pick apart the way it's worded now. Subsection E of the same section on totality of the circumstances indicates that the severity of the crimes at issue is to be considered in the totality of the circumstances regarding use of force, but gives no guidance as what is the severity of the crime at issue. If I were to sell somebody a grain of rice-sized grain of crack cocaine, that's a second-degree felony punishable by 9 years in prison. If I were to punch a police officer, that would be a much lesser degree of felony. If I were to beat somebody with a baseball bat, that would be a lesser degree of felony. Clearly, the severity, just to say severity of the crime justifies how much force gets used, doesn't give any guidance at all. Section 2-52-5, use of force prohibitions. Number 9 says the use of unreasonable force will subject officers to discipline as well as to possible criminal prosecution and or civil liability. The previous 8 provisions in that section all begin, officers shall not. The sentence is structurally different, belongs in a section of its own, and also it applies penalties, potential penalties, only to unreasonable force, and those penalties should also apply to use of force which is not necessary and use of force which is more than proportional, because each of those is separated in the opening section as 3 different kinds of force, and penalties should be provided for each of those 3. Under section 2-52-6, under use of force procedures, number 10 there says verbal warning shall be given when feasible prior to the use of deadly force. Similar to some of the other, that should be its own section.
May I ask him a question?
Sure, please.
First of all, thank you for coming here. I think your point on the severity of the crime definitions is very interesting, and particularly your position as an attorney thinking about how it could be misunderstood. I think we're all looking for clarity here, so I appreciate what you've offered here, particularly the thing on the severity of the crime, and what does that mean? How is that measured? What guidance are we giving police officers if that's all we say? So I thank you for that, and I just wanted to say that out loud.
All right, thank you.
Court, we have another question, Alan.
I'm sorry.
Alan?
Sorry. Do you by any chance have a written copy of your recommendations that we might be able to have?
No, but I can provide, I mean, I'll email them to you tomorrow. Does that work?
I would appreciate that, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Ted Lewinsky, followed by JP Arosa. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Ted Niemiecki. Here is, I'm just wondering how many of you have to deal directly with cops on the street, on the daily basis? Not too many, I'm afraid. Now, here is issue, another issue. I've been dealing with court system, Metro Court, appealing to District Court, with judges, dealing with judges. Now, then I even have one went to appellate court already. Yes, what I'm trying to say, when judges start to play politics, we never will have justice. That's very simple as that. Cop has to be cop, and free from any political influence. Now, let's go to 3 weeks ago, I called 911. You know, I have to wait 5 minutes to answer my call. 911 to answer my phone. 5 minutes. How would you like to have heart attack and wait for 5 minutes? You would be gone. Yes, I took that. Not much was changed. Same thing with 242 cops. Yes, this is issue right here, cops issue. 45 minutes took to answer telephone. I'm sorry, that's not progress. We want to see it. So anyway, what you get when you get retired cop and lawyer? Oh, well, yes, black one. I'm sorry, nothing personally. But you know about who I'm talking. Well, I had to deal with him sweeping under the rug. In fact, I'm going to be talking about force on the next, I'm signing it on the next one. And I bring it much to attention. What I'm saying right here, I wrote his note below, and it says, P.S. I will appreciate if director don't sweep under the rug this time. Thank you.
Thank you. J.P. Arosa? Did I pronounce that correct?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
Thank you. My name's JP, and I actually wanted to make a comment about the use of force policy. I'm a clergy member of the Episcopal Diocese of the Rio Grande and also the missioner to the homeless and displaced. And as a member of APD Forward Coalition, we join this coalition because we strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being. So while we applaud APD for prioritizing de-escalation techniques and strongly support enhanced training on de-escalation techniques for all officers, I think one of the things I would look for is that the policy should also reflect what tools and resources are available to the officers in those situations before the use of force is needed or used. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That concludes our public comments. We'll move to reports from city staff, but prior to that, I've got to make a statement, brief statement. One of our former members, Mr. Jim Larson, sent us an email commenting on our failure to meet the 10-day minutes being posted, and there was an error in our office, and we've corrected that error, and hopefully from this point forward, we will meet our 10-day requirements of posting our minutes. So we do have a plan in place to satisfy that, so thank you, Mr. Larson, for that. He also did make some changes while he was a member on those minutes, so those minutes will be put into our minutes tonight, and, or corrections to the minutes, okay? So thank you with that. First, we'll have,
To approve the minutes?
oh, okay, I'm sorry. We need to approve our minutes. Can I get a motion, please? Thank you.
So I would move that we approve the minutes and include Mr. Larson's comment back as part of those minutes.
Second.
All right, it's been motioned and second that we approve our minutes and also put Mr. Larson's comments into those minutes. All right, can I get a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Both have the same rights. Thank you. All right, let's move on to reports from city staff. First, we have APD. Who do we have on those comments? Can you please state your name, sir?
Good evening, Chair Waits, members of the board. My name is Commander Mike Miller, and I am the Commander of Internal Affairs. And I bring forward today just some of the internal affairs numbers that I bring you on a monthly basis. So beginning with the dispatch calls for service, in May, we had 46,530, which was actually an increase over April of 2,086 calls for service. In the internal affairs unit, we completed 15 cases for the month of May, and there was also one case that was administratively closed. And of all of those cases that we closed, there was the following discipline that was imposed. There was one counseling, there were 2 verbal reprimands, 1 letter of reprimand, there were 2 suspensions, each for 8 hours, and then there was another suspension for 80 hours. And finally, for our early intervention system, we had 64 alerts that were distributed throughout the police department for the month. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Any questions?
No.
Thank you. We were going to discuss the use of force tonight. I think this is a perfect opportunity to do that since we have APD first on the agenda. Ed, do we know who that person is? Commander Middleton? Okay.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Commander.
I'm Rob Middleton, and I'm the newly appointed commander of the Internal Affairs Force Division.
Good evening, Chair Waits and members of the Police Oversight Board. My name is Jolene Luna, and I'm with the APD Compliance Bureau Implementation Unit Manager. I am here tonight on behalf of the Albuquerque Police Department's Office of Policy Analysis to present the use of force policy 2-52. Commander Middleton will actually conduct the presentation. However, I'm giving you an overview of the OPA's standard process with our new policy development. So basically, in an effort to provide transparency and public input regarding APD's policy development process, we are conducting an OPA meeting in conjunction with the Police Oversight Board monthly meeting. Commander Middleton will present the policy developed through the circulation of draft 252, which was commented upon by the parties and monitor, and after receipt of comments, a meeting was held where the recommendations on the policy were discussed. The city and APD received the comments and recommendations and created a draft that is presented tonight. POB member Dr. Cass, as well as CPOA Director Harness, have been part of the process and have received the draft and afforded the ability to provide comments. The Police Oversight Board has been an active participant in the development of the draft presented tonight. Following Commander Middleton's presentation, there will be public questions and comments. If any member of the public wishes to provide a formal recommendation of the policy, I have recommendation forms, which I can leave up here or in the back, and members can complete the forms, return them to me at the end of the meeting tonight, or submit them through the city's website at cabq.gov/police. So just to give you an overview of our policy development process, we are in the first phase, which is the development of the policy. We're presenting the draft tonight. From the draft, we will place this policy on APD's internal website for public or for commentary by APD personnel. During this time, the public is also welcome to provide input. 7 days before we hear the policy at the Policy and Procedures Review Board, we will collect all the recommendations, consider them, and present them to the APD's Policy and Procedure Review Board held, probably, we're anticipating that meeting to be held in early July. From the Policy and Procedure Review Board, it will then move to the Police Oversight Board for review and recommendations for 30 days. Since this is a court-approved settlement agreement policy, it will also be sent to the monitor for review and approval. Once approved by the monitor, the chief will approve the policy. It will then go through circulation through our Power DMS website as well as the city's website. And that would conclude our policy development process. Annually, after that, we should be reviewing the policy as well, just to ensure it's still in compliance with all our current processes. So with that being said, I will go ahead and turn it over to Commander Middleton, who will present the draft use of force policy 2-52.
Thanks. Thank you. Good evening.
Evening.
And this is, so just to be clear, this is the 252 policy, and what that is the use of force general policy for the Albuquerque Police Department, and it's in a proposed draft right now. There are several more attachments to the use of force suite. The next policy that we're going to introduce is 253, and that's the use of force definitions. Following that will be 254, and that's the intermediate weapons. And then the 255, which are the de-escalation techniques, and 256 is the use of force documentation, investigation, and review. So what we're focusing on right now and what this draft is the use of force general policy. The current policy that we're working under is a use of force suite, and this policy was developed with the input of several members to include Director Harness, Dr. Cass, the US DOJ, city attorneys, members of the Albuquerque Police Department. We had, at the direction from independent monitors, we had first line police officers, first line supervisors, lieutenants, a commander, and we also have a collaborative effort from the Albuquerque Police Officers Association. We are listening to the APOA. We understand that they have a lot of recommendations that they want added into this. We're listening to them, and I just want to make that clear that we are listening to them, and we want to incorporate the collaborative effort from everybody in this and make something easily understandable for police officers. One of the first things we considered when writing this draft was also a recommendation, and that was to make this clear, concise, and directive. So when you read this draft and when the public reads this draft, they'll see language in here that says shall, and it's broken down into several paragraphs. Our old policy, or the policy that we're working under right now, you'll see large segments of narrative in there, and you have to read through to find out what is that actually telling the officer to do. It's a little bit confusing, and it's proved to be confusing for police officers. This one has the shall language and the directive language in there to make it easy for a police officer to understand. A lot of the there are a lot of repeated themes in this. The first was mentioned earlier in public comment, and I really appreciate the gentleman coming up here and talking about that. But the repeated theme in this is reasonable, necessary, and proportional. Officers also have to consider the minimum amount of force and and what they can do to reduce or eliminate the need to use force. So when we get into the de-escalation policy, we're going to address those steps. So one of the directive languages in this policy is that officers will consider those de-escalation steps to reduce or eliminate the need to use force. So that's the stark contrast between this policy and the policy that we're currently working under. The current policy tells officers, it directs officers, it tells officers what can I do to use force in this situation. And this policy directs officers, what can I do to de-escalate or minimize or reduce or eliminate the need to use force. So that's one of the repeated things throughout this policy. I'm going to, if I can, one of the comments made earlier talked about let me get to the right section.
Before you do,
Yes, sir.
can you just briefly define reasonable to me?
Reasonable is actually defined in, it's a CASA definition,
Right?
and let me get to that section for you.
Because it's used throughout your, the use of force policy, and I'm just, hopefully.
Right. And what we found in the CASA definition is that reasonable is synonymous with objectively reasonable. The exact definition that we have for it is, it refers to force which is objectively reasonable, that's the synonymous, under the circumstances and the minimum amount of force necessary to effect an arrest or protect the officer or another person. And that's also a CASA definition, and it's written there for you.
Okay, I'm
And
sorry.
I know, and I can address a few of the comments here now. I know we're gonna.
No,
comments
go ahead and
later.
continue. I'm sure it's going to come up again.
Okay, sure. The first one was in 252-4, I think it was A2, and it explains an officer shall use only the degree of force that is reasonable and necessary under the circumstances and proportional to the threat or resistance of the individual. And the comment was made that the totality of the circumstances should be up in this line. We are going to take all of this under advisement and talk. So I have some academy personnel here to talk about that. We'll look at that. But totality of the circumstances is explained at the bottom of this page. So I can explain further what that means. When we talk about the totality of the circumstances, there's 3 levels that the officer needs to consider, and it's the severity of the crime, the immediacy of the threat, and the level of resistance. So an officer will not just consider one of those. They're going to consider all 3 of those when they're involved in a possible use of force encounter with an individual. And the scenario that was brought up was second-degree felony, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure he went, but a second-degree felony of a crack dealer or a person punching a police officer in the face. The officer is not going to just consider the severity of the crime. They're going to consider the immediacy of the threat and the level of resistance posed by that individual to the police officer. Does that make sense? Okay.
I think that what Mr. Wegman was saying was the not defining what the severity of the crime is a problem for police officers themselves. And so how do they weigh those things? And I think his example was a good one. And so I think if we are looking at this policy as guidance for police officers on the street, which I would hope that that's what we're all doing,
Yes.
that the severity of the crime definitions matters. You know what I mean? So what is it that they're weighing?
Right, and this, so if we started putting the 4 examples in the policy, it would be a document.
It would be another novel. Okay.
So what this is directing the training academy to do is to develop the training for this policy. So the severity of the crime, the examples would be brought up in the training academy to teach an officer what that severity means. And I don't want to speak for you, Officer Nico, but there's going to be a video library describing a lot of what the definitions in this policy, where officers can go back and refer to what does that mean. The training is going to be developed. When the training is developed, it's going to be classroom training where they can answer those questions. Officer Nico is sitting here as well, so he will take that under advisement. to
So
describe
this,
that.
what you're saying is the policy is not a training document, it's just a guidance for the training, and the training is where that definition will become clear.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm
And
good.
there's several levels of training too, so there's going to be a preload for this document. Just like we're doing for the public today, this is a preload. We're showing the draft of the document. Once it's approved and it's set up for training, the training curriculum, the lesson plan will be developed. Officers will attend a classroom portion of this. Then they're going to have a follow-up in the reality-based training center to actually do a hands-on of what this means. Supervisors will be there as well to evaluate the use of force, and they'll be able to categorize these things, and this will be a later section of whether it's a level 1, 2, or 3. So it'll be a repeated training process to ingrain this policy into the Albuquerque police officers.
Thank you, that structure makes sense, I just needed to bring it up.
Okay. The next section, and correct me if I'm skipping something, but 2-52-5 and 9 all the way at the bottom. I understand what the gentleman was saying, that it seems it might be out of place. I understand that, and that's one of the considerations that we came up with earlier, is this might be out of place in this section right here. but it's something that we all agreed upon that should be in this policy. And if you refer to paragraph 15 from the CASA, that's the exact wording in paragraph 15, that the use of unreasonable force will subject officers to discipline as well as to possible criminal prosecution and/or civil liability. So we all believe that needs to be in this document. And as long as we're on that same page, these are some of the notes I wanted to make sure that I sent to you. When I talked about that clear, concise, and directive language of the policy, if you look at 2-52-6, use of force procedures, general procedures, this is what the officers need to understand. And if you look at all 7 of these, there's key words in every one of them. And I'll just go through. The first one is announce your intent. Second one, maximize their reaction. Third, issue a verbal warning. Number 4, avoid the unnecessary risk to bystanders. These are clear directives to police officers. Number 5, set them up as soon as possible, and it's safe to do so. 6, it talks about use of force against a handcuffed individual and how clear and directive that is. And it should be 7 right there, there's a typo, but safely intercede. So we're directing officers, if you see something, you need to safely intercede. Number 7, and document any use of force. These are just clear directives that any police officer can learn in the training environment and refer to a policy and understand this. There is a repeated theme through this whole thing, and I have a lot of highlights in this, and it comes back to reasonable, necessary, and proportional. A lot of questions that people had was, when we talked about the proportional amount of force, the first thing that they gave back to us was, are you talking about equality? And that's not what that means. Proportionality does not mean equality. So, and I can define that for you too, if you have any questions about that. We've been talking about this for days and weeks and months, so I can talk about this for hours, but I'm just trying to give you the general theme of what this is and the reason why it was written as this, to be directive. One other thing in here that I think is important, and we all believe it was important, this is the input that I received, is on the very first page. There's a paragraph about midway down that talks about once force is used, officers shall reduce the level of force or stop the force as the resistance or threat decreases. So when I had my meeting with Chief Geyer, you've seen his bio. He is a police officer first. He understands police work, and he also understands leadership. And one of the trends that he's recognized across the country by going to IACP conferences and talking to other chiefs of police is that there's an emotional side of using force. And when a police officer recognizes that there's an emotional side of using force, they need to also recognize when to stop using force. And that interceding part is very important in this as well. So if his partner sees that that emotional side is taking over, they need to step in and make sure that that force is stopped. So we're trying to get in this policy for officers to recognize when that emotional side is taking over, as well as their partners, so they can stop the force, stop using force when the resistance or threat decreases.
Yeah, go ahead.
When we were in the academy, the Citizens Police Academy, the woman who was running it, the officer that was running it at the time, I asked her, what is the training you think you're missing? And she spoke specifically to that. She said it's not just in the same circumstance, but let's suppose you go to a circumstance and your adrenaline's on fire, and now you get another call. How do you decompress in that process? You know, that is something she thought was really nationwide, something really important to pay attention to, and it seemed related to what you were saying.
Right. So there's a 3-pronged system with the Albuquerque Police Department that I fully believe in. We have a chaplains unit, we have behavioral sciences, and we also have peer support. So after something like this happened, officers have resources to rely on to decompress them, to get them out of that hypervigilant stage and back to normal again, so they can go to their families and be normal, not just the next call. But they need to be able to be aware and make educated, conscious decisions for their family, for the next call for service that they have.
It's just a little off topic, but I just thought it was important for right now.
Yeah, but as well as that, we want that in policy too, to tell the officer, listen, realize that your adrenaline might be up on this call. Talk to your first line supervisor. That's another thing that we recognized with the Albuquerque Police Department is the first line supervision is extremely important. When that officer or sergeant has the 3 stripes on their sleeves, they need to recognize that adrenaline in their officer and bring them back down or pull them away from calls for service to make sure that they're healthy for the next call. And I recognize all you from the Citizens Police Academy. I taught one of your classes.
Any other comment? Is that it?
I'm not sure of the time frame here or the format. I really could go line by line this and explain every one of these, but that's the general overview. And I did talk to Director Harness, and I believe that is a general overview. Maybe he can comment and ask any more questions that he has as well.
Well, what we want to do is make sure we get public comment, make sure we get input from our public. So we have a list of probably about 10 or 11 people.
Great.
So if you would stick around to answer any pertinent questions that they might have,
Sure.
we appreciate that. So.
Right.
Sure.
Is there a rhyme or reason for the order in which these 4 policies are in?
Yes. So the very first one is the use of force general policy, and this is going to define language, terms like necessary, reasonable, proportional. It's going to define the rest that comes after this. So especially 2-56, when we have the reporting, investigating, and the documenting, it has to refer back to the general policy. So if we go in order for the definitions, that's the next one. We have to make sure that this terminology is going to be accepted by all the parties and approved before we can start going into the next segments. So if we wrote all of them at once and produced them as an entire use of force suite, we would have to do an amendment of every time one word was changed, we would have to amend everything. So we want to get it all right first, and then everything else will flow a lot more naturally after this. Okay.
Any other comment? Okay. So now we'll have our public comments. I need to state that we are holding everyone to 3 minutes, and will be timed. And please state your name for the record so that we can get that correct. And so our first one is Nancy. Where's she at? I know, there she is. There's Nancy. And next would be Maggie Keel and Robbie Heckman. Hi, Nancy.
Hi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Nancy Koenigsberg, Koenigsberg. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights New Mexico, an organization that advocates for the civil and legal rights of people with all types of disabilities. And DRNM, my organization, is also a member of APD Forward. One of our colleagues, Robbie Heckman, drafted a matrix of comments, section by section, which has been submitted by email, but he will offer a hard copy into the record this evening. So I'm not going to do a point by point. You'll have it on paper. The use of force policy is the linchpin to reforming APD's culture and address the excessive use of force that was the basis of the DOJ's investigation and of the CASA that we're operating under now. And stating the obvious, but this is why we're here. Law enforcement officers have the legal authority to do what no other branch of city or state government can do, use deadly force, which can kill people. And the use of force can also injure and maim people, and people with disabilities had been disproportionately subjected to use of force. So that's why we're all here. This is the most important policy that will be revised, and it's incredibly important to all of us. So to assure that force is used only when necessary, we believe that the city must adopt the use of force policy as drafted by the Department of Justice. I see the overarching themes of the DOJ draft as twofold. Use de-escalation techniques and to reduce or eliminate the need to use force, and if force is necessary, use the minimum amount of force required to perform the officer's lawful purpose. We, and especially me as a disability rights advocate, appreciate the many references in the policy that emphasize de-escalation as the first requirement and the development of a de-escalation policy, and we're looking forward to reviewing those. As noted in district court on Monday, APD has done an excellent job of teaching these de-escalation techniques in the context of the crisis intervention training each officer is required to take. It's important to note that that training is provided to teach officers skills to more safely interact with individuals with behavioral health disorders, and that training has received national attention. But we encourage APD to incorporate the de-escalation in all aspects of their work. Yet despite the many references to de-escalation in the use of force policy that we're looking at here, it may undermine the emphasis of the use of de-escalation interventions in the way the policy is drafted. And I'm hearing a bell. Is that for me, and is it time to stop? 5 seconds. Oh boy. We're concerned that the language bleeds over and is ambiguous in some places that leaves the opportunity for previous uses of force techniques, and that's what concerns us the most. I can stop if you want, or I have 2 paragraphs left, but whatever obviously you choose to do.
Go ahead and read those 2 paragraphs.
Okay. I have a small technical edit that I think is incredibly important at 2-5254. It currently reads, officers shall not use deadly force when an individual is only threatening suicide or self-injury. I think that was probably an inadvertent use of the word only, which minimizes the seriousness of a suicide attempt. So I would simply offer to be parallel with other language, officers shall not use deadly force against an individual who is threatening suicide or self-injury. So in conclusion, I really believe we need to adopt the DOJ draft that'll make this community feel safe, and that's why we're here. Thank you.
Nancy Joanne has a question for you.
If I remember correctly, you and Peter Kruper work together, is that right? Because he sent us an email as well.
Yes, he did.
And was concerned about some of the legal references in the policy. Do you have anything on that, or shall we just go with Peter's input?
I did not do the research on that tonight, Ms. Fine. There are a couple of references that he was talking about. I think generally what people call, the Graham case out of the U.S. Supreme Court, which I think was embedded in the current policy, and as the commander said, focused on how to use force, and this one is gearing towards how not to, which we think is important. But what the community is looking for, and I think in what Mr. Kubra was alluding to, is to steer away from the reference of the Graham standard as what it is that this department is going to use.
And I have one other question. On the only,
yes,
the way I read that was if that's the only activity that's happening, as opposed to
sure.
There could be, I'm threatening suicide, but I'm also threatening to kill somebody else. That's, so for the value of only could have a reason
sure.
in there. So it may be worthwhile to word that a little differently
sure.
so that your point is well taken. I just think we don't consider the whole scope of what the officers may have to deal with. Right. So we don't want to eliminate
correct.
that if someone's threatening suicide,
sure.
you can't use deadly force even if I've got a gun to her head.
Right.
Okay.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I guess that shows the need to craft things, and it's not only for the public, but obviously the officers who are using it need to. And I appreciate that perspective. I didn't see it that way because I come at it with a particular lens. So thank you for the opportunity.
Right. Thank you, Nancy. Maggie Keel. Did I pronounce that correctly? Okay.
Mr. Chairman and members of the board, my name is Maggie Kyle, and I represent the National Association of Social Workers, the New Mexico chapter. We joined the APD Forward Coalition because as social workers, we want the interactions between police and public to benefit our neighborhoods and our community, especially when the police interact with the disenfranchised among us. Those in poverty, are mentally ill, have gender differences, or are members of a minority population. We applaud the APD for prioritizing de-escalation techniques and strongly support enhanced training on de-escalation techniques for all officers. We believe thorough training is essential for officers to practice actual scenarios involving de-escalation examples, and from what I heard, this is happening now in the APD Academy, and for people to really follow that and know those scenarios match the definitions that have been presented in this policy. NASW New Mexico looks forward to working with Police Chief Geyer as he seeks to implement changes to the culture of APD, changes which emphasize a guardian mentality compared to the warrior mentality of the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Robbie Heckman, followed by Laura Williams, followed by Barbara Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair Waits, board members, Director Harness. As my colleague Nancy Koenigsberg said, we submitted our comment matrix in writing to the board, I believe yesterday, so you have electronic copy. I would like to enter it into the record today, and we can provide a hard copy for that. And I won't go through each comment tonight out of respect for time, but I just kind of wanted to go over the general themes of our concerns, as well as I think that were stated earlier, some of our appreciations of the redirection of this, that there clearly is, as Commander Middleton said, there clearly is more directive language in this, although there does seem to be, in our opinion, some backsliding into kind of the Graham standard, and we illustrate those in our comments. But I think one of the things that's been said tonight and is worth repeating is the emphasis on de-escalation and having that escape. I think I appeared before this board at the last meeting, and that was one of APD Forward's concern too, is that the notion of de-escalation, escape, its kind of use specifically for people in crisis, and be a tool in the officer's toolkit that can be used to and applied to any situation which calls for it. That said, we fully appreciate and understand that those techniques require extensive training. They're not easy. We aren't Pollyannish about this. That is not an easy skill to teach any human being, active listening and being able to de-escalate things in a tense situation, so that follow through with training. Part and parcel of that, and another thing that we appreciate is some of the language change that has occurred in the document. Something seemingly as innocuous as changing the word subject to individual, we think is a very important, and we want to recognize that, and we would like to see that again escape just the words in the policy, and also start to weave itself into their interactions with individuals, that is police interactions with individuals, as well as in their training. So it's really important if we're pushing to bring about a culture change, that a lexicon that supports that culture change come about. And so we appreciate that intentional change in the OPA policy draft that we had. I think in reference to the Graham standard, our main concern there is that is an after action. Was that it? Okay. Can I just take half a minute and finish?
Go ahead.
The Graham standard is really an after action review, and so it doesn't lend itself to this type of policy where you're trying to be directive. For example, the 2020 hindsight, you can't consider that there were less lethal options. You can't consider what APDs in their use of force definition refers to in a force array. But all of those things are going to be critical in the training and the implementation of this policy as it unfolds on the streets to emphasize that they do have all of these tools at their disposal, and that there's an emphasis on de-escalation. And with that, I'll conclude. Thank you, Chair Waits.
Any questions for that? All right, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, how can I submit? Can I just hand over my?
Uh,
You guys got it?
well,
We do, but Director Harness, do we need to make a motion to include that with the?
Okay.
Perfect. Awesome. Thanks, Robbie.
And just for the, I did, in a very ineloquent way, paste it into the website. The format of the website is not real conducive to the way that we compiled our comments, but I did paste it into the website.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Laura Williams?
My name is Laura Williams, and I'm a member of ACLU. Police reform is very important to me because I'm interested in community policing. And to have community policing, you have to have trust. Because of misuse of power by excessive use of force, this has not been possible for people to really trust the police department. So this is what I want to emphasize. We need a clear, easy to understand use of force to ensure that the officers understand what is expected of them, and very important, what standards they will be held to. And we, the people, need to have a clear understanding of what the policy is and the standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Barbara Ferguson, followed by Suzanne Hatch. Good evening.
Good evening, I'm Barbara Ferguson. I guess I'll just start out with my question. After an officer has been in a position where their adrenaline's flowing and they're heightened, do they have a way to literally pull those officers out and replace them with somebody else for the next incident so that it minimizes actual incidents that you have with excessive use of force? Community policing, too, is very practical when you pull somebody out of the area. If it's a high-density Hispanic, high-density African-American, are you going to place those type of policemen in there so they don't feel like they're being racially profiled? I apologize. So if you're looking at more of an international area, are you placing somebody in that area that actually understands the people that are living there? Larger areas or larger cities that you're looking at, you have a Latino quarter or a Latin quarter. They're going to use people from that area that speak the language and understand the culture. Is this what's going on? This is your community policing that you need. So in these international sections where you've got this huge mixture of people that are coming in under asylum and they're feeling a little lost while they're here, do you actually have somebody that can reach out to those areas to de-escalate anything that's going there and to minimize the effects that the gangs may have on them? So those are things that, those are my questions. You know, how is this actually going to work? How is it going to play that way? Instead of just sending a squad car in that may or may not know the community itself. Thank you. I guess that's my question.
Thank you. Susan Hatch, followed by Ted Lewinsky.
Mr. Chairman and members of the Police Oversight Board, my name is Susan Allison-Hatch, and I am the Episcopal Church of New Mexico's representative to APD Forward. From 2010 to 2016, I was chaplain at St. Martin's Hospitality Center. I want to tell 3 very short stories. The first, a man standing in the park. A police officer comes up and kicks an empty beer can to the side of the man's feet, and then arrests the man for drinking in public. A group of people sleeping on the sidewalk in front of Good Shepherd, I believe with Good Shepherd's permission. They are awakened, ask for their IDs are seized and destroyed. And then perhaps the saddest one for me, because I know her well and respect her. A woman, maybe my age, maybe a little younger, whose bag, she was just a ways away from her bag that contained her whole life. The bag was taken, dumped, and there was her life, dumped on the sidewalk. Capricious, unnecessary, and destructive. And that is why I want to commend the revision of this policy and ask that one of those foundational principles under 2-52(2) be altered slightly. Officers shall make every effort to respect the dignity of every human person and to preserve life, human life, in all situations. I believe if that is the foundational principle under which we all live, we will all live much better together. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hatch. Ted Lewinsky.
Thank you. My name is Ted Niemiecki. Well, I hear community policing, constitutional policing. Well, let me put this way. Answer. I am conservative. No nonsense. And I understand in constitutional policing and rights, etc., etc. Quite better. Now, also, protect and serve. We hear that. You can see it on the cops' cars. For who they protect and for whom they serve. I know one thing. Corporate institution, big organization, Walmart and so on, that's where they work overtime. So that is example. Well, why to work for citizens? And they get paid overtime and also protecting big municipal monopolies. That's who they're protecting. Now, let's go to subject, suspect. I don't like it, neither one. Calling me either one. Suspects, let me go now to yesterday, what's happened to me. Excessive force. Yesterday, at just few minutes before 5 o'clock, I was going to committee meeting, city council meeting, zoning. On Central, just approaching heavy traffic before 5 o'clock. Approaching Second Street, in my rear view mirror, I seen it, cops, two units in fact. But anyway, I just wanted cut quickly as possible so I can make it for 5 o'clock, which is driving slow, very slow. Next thing, so I make a turn, of course, you can see light. So immediately I stop that time. So I open the door and walk outside. That time they kept yelling and screaming. 2 rookies, two rookie cops. One named Trujillo, another named, what is Kaplan?
But can you finish that
Okay, okay.
quickly? Thank you.
So, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead and finish.
So, anyway,
Brief.
that time, yelling, screaming at me, and myself having, I'm speaking for myself, my having disability, my hearing, voice recognition. When somebody on the front and somebody behind me, yes, I get frustrated. So I don't have to, you don't have to speak loud to me, but in the crowd or loud both sides, yes, I lost my tooth just during this incident. So anyway, right, if that's not enough, I look at back and forth, frustration. Next time I noticed one of them, Kaplan, pointing pistol at me. That's never, ever happened to me in my life. And that is excessive force. I don't appreciate anyone should. Can I finish?
Well,
Summarize?
let me make a suggestion so we can continue.
I guess I already did file it.
Okay.
And
my
risk
suggestion.
management, and I also requested lapel cameras, recordings.
All righty. Thank you, Ted. Appreciate it. All right, Diane McCash, followed by Kathleen Burke, followed by Rachel Smith.
Hi, I'm Diane McCash. That was supposed to be a stopwatch. The proposed policy requiring use of minimum reasonable and necessary force that's proportional to the situation seems like a real step in the right direction to me. My hope and expectation is that in amending the policy in this way would have prevented an officer from shooting a teenage girl fleeing a stolen car situation. My question would be, you have to weigh everything. If running away might be considered a high degree of resistance, I would hope that it would be considered that if the person is not a danger, that they wouldn't be able to shoot someone who freaked out and is running away from a situation and they're not known to be a threat. So I think that's a concern. The other thing that was much in the news, oh my God, that's my alarm, I'm sorry. This was a good idea, I thought it wasn't so much. In the James Boyd situation, you know, what it feels to me happened is people got impatient, you know, and the situation was provoked and escalated. I would hope that a policy like this would help people in a situation, officers, to take a breath, step down, really think about what they're doing or what they might be about to do, and find a different way to deal with, because there are going to be other people who refuse in some kind of passive way. And to put them at risk, they may be making a bad choice, but to put them at risk of being shot is a huge mistake. And if a policy like this can prevent those kinds of situations, you know, I would really be happy to see it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Kristen?
In the policy, actually, I just want to tell you that in the policy that this draft that we're looking at, it says officers shall not use deadly force against an individual who is fleeing or attempting to escape unless probable cause to believe that the individual has committed or is in the process of committing a felony involving the infliction or threatened infliction of death or serious bodily harm. If permitted to flee or escape, the individual would pose a significant threat of death or serious bodily harm to someone, okay? When feasible, the officers have identified themselves as law enforcement and have stated the intention to use deadly force and have given the individual a reasonable opportunity to comply. So I think it speaks
That
directly.
sounds that it would speak exactly directly.
Exactly
I
to
had
what
read
you
it
were saying.
earlier, but I forgot to bring a copy, and I couldn't remember if that was specifically addressed.
Well, I remember reading it when I read it, and that was a concern that I had as well. So I just wanted to let you know that that part's already in here.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Kathleen Burke, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and ladies of the board. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the community. My name is Kathleen Burke. I'm a member of the Southeast Area Community Policing Council. I'm also, via my association with Street Safe New Mexico, where I'm the Associate Director, I'm a member of APD Forward as well. Just a few comments that I'd like to share with you. I am involved in many levels of society, both at the street level in the international district and beyond, up into other echelons of society as well. It's come to my attention that one of the most controversial problems we have in Albuquerque today is issues related to use of force and ongoing issues related to use of force. My observations at the Community Policing Council are that we have members of society who are really upset that this is an ongoing problem which we have not made serious strides thus far to remedy, though I understand we're all trying. We at the Community Policing Council are also trying. By the way, we have not finished our edits to the policy as we last received it. However, I'm going to consult with my chair to make sure that we get our edits submitted into the right hands as soon as possible so that you know we're doing our part at the Community Policing Council. However, back to my point being that it appears to me that a lot of resentment is building up in the community, and that resentment is not just at the police department, but it's also building up and extending to our mayor, our chief of police, the community policing councils, and beyond. And so I would just ask that we move this along as best we can and as thoroughly as possible and with as much care for the citizens of our community as we possibly can. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Last, Rachel Smith, welcome.
Good evening, thank you. Thank you, my name is Rachel Smith and I'm here representing Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless. We are also a member of APD Forward. Albuquerque Healthcare for the Homeless became involved with APD Forward because we were concerned about our community and especially the community of people that are experiencing homelessness. We are really looking forward to seeing a policy that addresses de-escalation as a priority. We know that people experiencing homelessness have experienced extreme amounts of trauma in their lives, and that's where we start when we do all the work that we do at Healthcare for the Homeless. And so we're encouraged to see this, and we're looking forward to seeing more on the training of de-escalation and the inclusion of this in the policy. And I also want to reiterate that we are asking the Office of Policy Analysis to really seriously consider all of the comments that APD Forward submitted in writing. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our public comments, but I'd like to make a comment. I appreciate everyone being here tonight and helping us as a community move this policy forward. We need your expertise, we need your advice, we need your input. And I want to thank you all for coming out here tonight. And all these comments will be on record and we will take them into consideration, each and every one of us. So thank you again. So, do you have a comment?
I apologize, I did not sign up. You want to say something, just 2 minutes?
Just 2 minutes.
Believe it or not, I can keep it to 2 minutes. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the courtesy, allowing me to speak. My name is Pete Donnelly, and I've been watching this process now for the last 3 years. One of the things I would like to emphasize is that this, of course, is where the rubber hits the road. When you're dealing with this policy, this is the policy why the Department of Justice is here. One comment that I was amazed that was made by Dr. Ginger that always surprised me. He said, you know, I could write that use of policy within 30 or 40 minutes. And he made the remark, and I was surprised. And I said, well, why don't you? And his remark was, it's not my job. It's the job of the community. It's the job of this committee. And with that said, once you get this in writing, once you finally adopt it, we went through an entire year of negotiating back and forth before one was finally adopted. And now we're back at it again. Once you come up with a policy, what I'd encourage this committee to do, and I'm going to finish up with this comment, please go out to the academy and find out how it's being taught. That is the key. You can have the best policy in the world, drafted by the best writers in the world, but if it's not trained properly and if it does not translate to the streets, it's useless. That's all I have to say, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate it. All right. Yes, you have a comment? Sure, please.
Okay. So I would like to thank everyone for coming today and making their comments. I appreciate APD Forward's very comprehensive, thorough set of edits, revisions, recommendations. We have received in the past, arguably the past 24 hours, but there was something floating around prior to that. Recommendations coming from the APOA, which is the police union. And I cannot help myself but to make some comments regarding what they have proposed. And I'm making these comments for the benefit of the Office of Policy Analysis for APD. Hopefully also for APOA, but I see that they have stepped out of the, oh no, they're back. And so to begin, I'll just say that I feel that for far too long, APD's culture and policies surrounding the use of force have focused almost exclusively on officer safety. These attitudes have been pervasive. They've resulted in policy prescriptions which have also for too long failed to adequately address the safety and sanctity of the other lives involved in any sort of use of force situation. This has resulted, I believe, in a very severe imbalance and discrepancy, which has resulted in a pattern of practice that of unconstitutional use of force. That pattern and practice is what brings us here today. I believe that police oversight intends to bring into full view that when force is used, another human life besides only that of the officer is also in jeopardy. And that particular life is just as deserving of protection, regardless of what brings that person, that individual, to the attention of law enforcement. I think at this juncture, critical juncture, it's necessary that we refocus our organizational thinking around police culture and the use of force against individuals, so as to emphasize that an officer's first responsibility is to protect life. I think taking the protecting of the life of the person under an officer's lawful command as seriously as he takes protecting his own is what is important and at stake here. I think we see here the community making that request of APD, asking them to recommit to the mission of protecting and serving by honestly reevaluating when and how officers use force and to what extent. I would urge APD to commit to using the minimum amount of force necessary to achieve its lawful goals, as opposed to the maximum amount of force tolerable before criminal or civil liability begins. The use of force policy we have in front of us today, that is the Office of Policy Analysis draft as of June 2006, I believe largely does that. Unfortunately, and why I'm making these comments, what I'm concerned about, is that there is a competing set of revisions that seeks to maintain what is the status quo. Those revisions are coming from the APD union. The APD union, the police union, maybe I should say, their version attempts to weaken and dilute the progress that I believe everyone in this room is earnestly attempting to make, and further is required by law to make. APD, through its draft, seems to prefer to continue with a policy that emphasizes officer safety at the expense of an opportunity to give equal treatment to all human life involved in any use of force interaction. The mechanism by which they aim to achieve this is through the incorporation of what is known as the Graham Standard. The problem with the Graham Standard, and another public commenter raised this, is that it does not look forward, and it is therefore not appropriate for incorporation in policy. The Graham Standard looks backwards to understand whether a particular use of force ekes past constitutional muster in a courtroom. Unfortunately, the Constitution, when it comes to examining a use of force, tolerates a lot. Arguably, it tolerates more than it should. In essence, Graham sets the standard for the maximum amount of force that is allowable before liability begins. A maximum force standard is problematic. It contravenes our settlement agreement. The settlement agreement is the law that binds us today. So first we have to meet the minimum use of force standard, and only after that can Graham become applicable after a use of force has occurred and inside a courtroom. So I really think that this is a minimum standard, working honestly towards a minimum standard of use of force. It is at once the most basic, but also the highest moral calling. The court order also proscribes it. If we do not abide by this standard, it exposes APD and the city of Albuquerque to increased civil liabilities beyond what we experience currently when we have use of force situations. I really strongly urge APD and the Office of Policy Analysis to abandon any attempt to incorporate the Graham Standard into this policy. I ask that you guys ignore this effort by the police union altogether, and I urge you to remain committed to what binds us at law, which is the minimum use of force standard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment?
Amen.
All right. All right, thank you all. Can we get a report from City Council?
Chairman Waits, board members, our office received the letter from Board Member Galloway regarding the board's decision to extend Director Harness's contract. We're planning to have a communication introduced at the next City Council meeting, which is on Monday, June 18th, that would extend his contract. Due to the July break for council, the communication should be approved in August. At the same upcoming council meeting on Monday, we will also introduce the board's proposed ordinance changes. That's been kind of floating around. That bill would be on the Finance and Government Operations Committee meeting in August, and then go on to full council from there. We have received a handful of new applications for appointment to the board within the last few weeks. I think the board's and CPOA's office appearance on I for New Mexico helped bring some applications in, so we appreciate that. I'd like to review these applications and get them considered for the current vacancies. So I'm planning to have that done by the end of this month, end of June, have some names chosen so they could attend the board's July meeting, and then move those appointments forward in August and get those approved in August. With that, I stand for any questions.
Will we be able to get maybe to the outreach committee the names of prospective board members to be able to meet with them? I think we're going to take on the pleasure of introducing ourselves to prospective board members and kind of giving them an opportunity to peek behind the curtain, so to speak, as to what the expectations will be, so that we don't surprise anybody once they're on board.
Chairman Waits, Board Member Galloway, I think that's a great idea. And you are the current chair of that committee? Okay, I will definitely do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. City Attorney. He's city council, yeah, Julian. Got a couple people.
Good evening, Chair Waits, board members, Assistant City Attorney Jeremy Schmiel with my update. So we had the hearing on Monday, of course, and we talked about quite a lot. You know, the compliance plan was updated. That status report, which was jointly filed by the monitor and parties, or not the monitors and parties, the monitor and the city, was discussed in court, of course. We had representation from the department, and they laid out everything that's been done since November to just here recently. So the next report will be August 31st, and it'll be in the same format. It'll again report on the compliance plan and the progress implementing the reform effort is spelled out in that document. What else was discussed? So the motion extending the deadline in paragraph 86, which speaks to the review of use of force policies and use of force training, was granted by the court, which means that the new deadline and the order sets out that the deadline to review the policies is now September 21st, and then to review the training is October 1st. And to be clear about what review the training means is that it's approved, basically, so that, you know, there's not an inordinate delay in the delivery of that training. That motion also set out a very specific calendar. As I mentioned, I think at the last board meeting, we want to be purposeful and timely in the discussions about the use of force policies, because everyone knows it's taken, it initially took an inordinate amount of time. I think it's actually more like 16 months to have gotten the city to the existing use of force policy suite. So in that motion by the city, it spells out the timeline, and the city is committed to adhering to that. So if the community or POB want more details on that, and of course, as these policies roll through, as Ms. Luna mentioned, the next step will be Power DMS. We want to make sure that on that first page, it's clearly set out what the community can expect as far as the timeline for the general use of force policy first, and then the rest of them that are lined up sort of like dominoes. What else? At the hearing, I gave myself more work, and because I knew that that backlog conversation was going to be confusing for the court and the community, because it's one that's taken me some time to get spun up on. I told the judge that the city would be filing an explanatory brief or just notice or whatever you want to call it, laying it all out there and just explaining how the numbers were derived. Certainly the backlog number, and the backlog number, of course, is relating to cases that have been delayed past 120 days, that have been swept into the nest, so to speak, starting from September 20th and moving forward. And so that's the 314 number. So that I'll be getting that filed by next Wednesday, and then I'm going to attempt to get it as a draft out. Because Ms. Konigsberg raised that in court, I am going to get them a draft, just because I feel like that's one touch point. It's really hard to have it sent out to a big group and to receive that feedback, but I really do want that community perspective on the draft so that I can incorporate whatever comments and perspective they have into the final filing. Now, with regard to the use of force policy, I worked closely with Commander Middleton, Officer Nico, from the academy, who's going to be, sort of, we jokingly say the face of this policy, but it's true. As Mr. Dinelli said, the training on this is going to be critical because it's going to be a sea change in the way that the department thinks about force. Just to address, because I feel like there needs to be some clarification about what is Graham and what from Graham causes problems. Because Graham is the severity, the threat, and the resistance. That is part of Graham, and it is in the policy. I believe the problems start with Graham when you start to look at things through a pinhole. And you're looking at it just from the perspective of that force application at that time based upon these rapidly evolving, tense, uncertain, and never use 2020 and all these different types of ideas that are interjected into there, which reduce the perspective to almost a non-analysis. Because if you tell someone that, well, you can't go and analyze a use of force and say, well, what happened based upon not only the severity and those three things, but also reasonableness, necessity, proportionality, minimum amount of force, that is a problem. Because then it raises the bar of the review to the point where you can't analyze it. And that is the whole point of reviewing force, is to analyze it, is to look at a lapel video, is to go and have an interview with an officer that's probative. And you absolutely, positively take into consideration their perspective, but you don't make it sort of an insurmountable touchstone that you can never analyze. And so as I was working with not just the department, but also with the parties, those were discussions that we've had. We'll continue to have those discussions through the policy development process. I think they're critical because this policy as it is right now, the existing 252, and the rest of it is just really, really, to be an artful, clunky. And when you pick it up and you look at it, you can't really figure out what the standard is. So I'm heartened by, the city is heartened by, and is supportive of, and worked hard on the draft that is here before y'all. So I would stand for any questions that you may have.
That's fine.
I have a question. I'm going to go back to the backlog cases.
Sure.
This has been a bell I've been ringing for the last 3 years. I want to make sure that in those backlog cases, we will see, no matter when it happened, the cases in which people were shot, that those are part of the backlog cases. We have seen some of them. We have not seen all of them. And we made a commitment that we would not let any cases, a deadline set that eliminates our review of cases that came before. So I want assurance that those backlog cases include the cases we have not seen.
Chair Waits and Board Member Fine, as a requirement, every officer-involved shooting has to go to the Force Review Board.
But there are some that brought the Department of Justice here that we have not seen.
So I can tell you that if there is a officer-involved shooting that is in that backlog, then it will go to the Force Review Board and the Police Oversight Board. So I mean, I don't have the list here in front of me, and I certainly don't have the historical perspective to say which those are, but I can tell you that is the requirement.
Okay, so I'm taking that as a yes. If it's not there, you'll make sure it gets there?
You know, if you want to do a deeper dive and figure out what that list is, then certainly we can do that. I'm telling you, as I stand here with the open draft of 252, I can't speak to that list. And so if you want to have a further conversation with the IA Force Division so that your list matches theirs, then I think that, you know.
Director Harness has the list.
Okay. Yeah, and certainly, I don't want to speak for Commander Middleton, but I think that's appropriate and necessary.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Schmel?
Schmiel.
Schmiel? I wanted to, just in case my comments were too biting, I should say, maybe I should clarify that I do believe that this policy we have before us is a great effort. I am, in fact, pretty pleased with it. I just am attempting to avoid a situation where there is a campaign to weaken or dilute what we have in here, because what we have in here is good. It does seek to protect people's dignity, their bodily safety, et cetera. And I do not want other interests to dilute that attempt. And my comments were directed at that, at what could happen to this policy as it works its way through this procedure, as opposed to what we have before us today. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other comment?
I think we all feel that way.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We don't have anyone from the mayor's office, do we, that would like to comment? I tried, James. Okay. All righty. CPC, anyone from the CPCs? No? Nope. Okay. Director Harness.
Chair Waits, Honorable Board, good evening. I'm going to make this brief since we still have about half of our agenda to go through.
Right.
It was a busy week. We had the monitors are in town. We were at the status conference, and we presented our investigative findings on CPC 077-18, the allegations made by Mr. Arianes regarding retaliation. That was something that the judge ordered an investigation through Deputy Chief Garcia, which was passed along to us because it involved a civilian. We presented those investigative findings to Judge Brack on Monday. And I also presented a copy of those investigative findings to Mr. Arianes on that day as well. It will go to the CRC in its next meeting and then come to the full board for its final conclusion in July. We need to get a final count for who wants to go to NACOL, so we can start making those arrangements.
When is it?
It's the last Saturday in October through the September through the first week of October in St. Petersburg, FLA. Due to the highly skilled senior admin that we have now, Katrina, we will be booking our own travel and not relying on working through the city, so it's going to be a much more efficient operation. We have the final steps in place for your new legal counsel contract. It's been signed, approved. We're getting the requisition in place, and so that should be a smooth transition. I met with Mr. Giaquinto from the monitoring team on 2 occasions. We discussed the board's concerns regarding the admin closed standard. And he took that to Dr. Ginger, and Dr. Ginger and the monitoring team suggest that we have that discussion with all of the parties to reach a solution that the board can find amenable. So we will be put on the agenda for the parties' discussion in order to discuss the standard for administratively closed cases as the agency has been conducting them in the past few months with the standard of minimally able to substantiate the allegations.
And that meeting is, we don't know the date yet?
No, the parties will put us on the agenda, and then we will participate in their weekly conversations with all the parties, the monitoring team, the DOJ, the city.
And the CRC committee will go?
And those alike. And it'll be a telephone conference.
Oh, okay.
Mr. Giaquinto selected a number of cases for his review, so we'll be getting those together and getting him that information. We are back into regular monitoring at this point. We're moving out of the technical advisory portion, and we're back into monitoring. We believe the monitoring period will end on the 30th of July, so we'll be looking at our activity from February through July, so that just Mr. Giaquinto and I actually went through some of the cases, February through May, and then he highlighted a couple of other cases that he wanted to look at, so we'll be getting him that information, and then once the monitoring period closes, we'll be finalizing those case numbers and getting him that information. We already have on the agenda questions for new council, but I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Matt and Mark. Matt has always been accessible whenever I needed a phone call or an email. Certainly been there giving us advice, and I want to let him know how much we appreciate him being there for us. So I stand for questions.
I don't have a question, but I want to add something. I just want to add one thing, and that is we should not close this meeting. I don't know when it would fit in, but I want to say congratulations to Chief Geyer for being selected as the permanent chief. And we want to wish him well, and we look forward to working with him as we move forward in advancing this process. It was on your agenda, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harness. We're going to take a 10-minute break just because it has been such a long meeting, and we'll be back at about 10 till. Motion to take a quick break?
I'm
Someone?
sorry.
All right.
I was so afraid it was going to get, I should have shut up. Another opportunity.